All right. Thank you very much. So I always say that university is more than just about going to class. It's about the experiences you have and the friends you make along the way. And going to these socials is a great opportunity to meet new people and network. So I highly encourage everyone to show up. All right, without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have a full panel today. Ooh, kicking over people's stuff. We've got a full panel today from across the university, not just the College of Arts. And we're very excited to have them with us today. I'll start off in order of the poster. We have Dr. Opeyemi Adesina, is an associate professor and the director of the UFE School of Computing. Dr. Adesina holds a doctorate degree from the University of Ottawa, located, of course, in Canada's greatest city. And his work on machine learning has been used to create 2 US patents for General Motors Canada, which is pretty cool. Dr. Zoe Francis is an associate professor of psychology. She holds a PhD from the University of Toronto, and her research looks at self-regulation and self-control, which means she always knows exactly why her students haven't done the readings. Dr. Joy Enyinnaya is an assistant professor with the School of Communication. She holds a PhD from Colorado State University, and her work looks at technology, culture, and misinformation, including looking at how misinformation shapes people's health decisions, which certainly isn't relevant at all to the current policy environment. Dr. Keziah Wallis is an assistant professor of anthropology with the School of Culture, Media, and Society. She holds a PhD in social anthropology and religious studies from Otago University in New Zealand, and her research looks at identity, being, and connectedness in the Asia-Pacific region. Her work often looks at the intersection of identity and technology, and she's written some incredible articles on VR and Indigenous identity, as well as on Bruce Lee. So lots of cool stuff to read. And last, but certainly not least, Dr. Michael Batu, who is an associate professor of economics, holding a degree from a PhD from Guelph. He specializes in applied econometrics, macroeconomics, and the economics of development. When he's not publishing articles on international worker remittances or the macroeconomic impact of foreign aid, Dr. Batu is a frequent contributor to the news media, both in Canada and internationally. So we've got some real celebrities in the panel today. All right, let's give our panelists a round of applause before we get started. I am now very happy to turn over the microphone to our moderator, and of course, the fearless leader of the Department of Political Science, Dr. Edward Akuffo.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swartz. Now, before we get things started, I would like to offer these opening remarks. Now, the Politalk Roundtable and Lecture Series is a platform for engaging in topical issues, pushing the boundaries of ideas, creating public awareness, and sustaining active minds that are conscious of political, cultural, and socioeconomic issues in our community and the world at large. Now today, as Professor Swartz said, we have the privilege to hear from esteemed scholars on critical issues of our time. It is important to note that the size of the earth has always remained the same, but there is no limit to the size of the world and the issues therein. And I'm confident that these esteemed colleagues and scholars will grow our world today with cutting-edge arguments in the spirit of enhancing the quality of academic debate through diversity of thought. Permit me to quote these words by the past president of UFE, Dr. Joan McLean. Dr. McLean says that engaging with different viewpoints and having our beliefs challenged is a fundamental aspect of university life. We must strive to preserve the vitality of our academic community and foster academic freedom while grounding discussions in care and mutual respect. This is a challenging but necessary undertaking. Together, we can promote healthy dialogue at UFE. And in that light, let us share our ideas without fear or favor and guided by principles of respect and care. So please feel free when it gets to the question time to direct your questions to any of these panelists. The panelists are going to do the job of articulating diverse, ideas on diverse, political issues and economic issues of our time and other social, issues. My hope is that you will give them your attention and that you will have the opportunity also to interact with them during the question and answer, period. Without much ado, let me turn the microphone to Professor Opeyemi to offer his remarks.
So, I don't know, do you want me to stand?
You would like to.
Okay, so, good evening. Or is it afternoon yet? Okay. I can see everywhere looks, really, really dark, so I felt it was evening. But anyway, good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be here, and most importantly, having discussion on this important topic, which is the world in turmoil. A lot is happening in the world of today. When it comes to technology, which I'm very fortunate to be, doing as part of life and as business. I've seen the world that graduates from, media. If I go by media in those days, you need to pay so much to make advertisements. With the advent of social media today, anybody can be a reporter. The same thing is coming to the world of, computing. In those days, in the beginning, for you to even run a simple program, you need to find yourself maybe in a room as big as this, and then have different computers. And I mean very heavy machines that requires expertise, it requires tact, to operate and manipulate to get things done. However, today, we have phones in our pockets. And the phones that we have today are so powerful. I mean, the world of Apple has made, powerful engines accessible, just through our pockets and our palms. The same thing has come to the world of AI. And I said, the people you should fear the most when it comes to AI are people that are using AI in their basements. Why? It is becoming so powerful. It is becoming something that anybody can have access to. You don't need to have a university degree for you to use artificial intelligence this day. Last night I sat down with ChatGPT and I was trying to analyze and forecast, stock exchange markets. And I was so impressed with the quality of information that I was able to generate after crafting my prompt very right. This tells you a lot about what is happening in our day. And I hope that we can shed some light, to all these things as we go through this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Opeyemi. So those that we should fear most are those sitting in the basement. They're hiding in the corners, using AI. Now let's turn the microphone to Dr. Joy Enyinnaya.
Yes. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to have this much needed conversation. So I am Nigerian and I am from Abia State, Igbo speaking. My mother's name is Christiana Onwabobi and my father's name is Chidoziri Onwabobi. I had spent most of my life in Nigeria and moved to the United States for graduate school. So my master's and PhD was in the United States. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to accept a job, so employment here in Canada at University of the Fraser Valley. And I've been here for about 3 years. I am very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I don't take it for granted. Having studied in the United States and teaching here, I really appreciated the caption, "The World in Turmoil," particularly with Shakespeare's quote, as we think about hell is empty and all the devils are here. And as I pondered on that topic, what does that really mean? And how do we think about our democracy? Because as we think about free speech and the cost, the high cost of free speech, Opeyemi talked about AI and just the ability for people to create information and spread it online. And sometimes with that harm, right, with misinformation, disinformation. But also on the other side of things, what does that mean with having our voices getting silenced because maybe we are saying things that the institution doesn't like to hear, or the political powers that be are uncomfortable with. I also think about restrictive immigration policies, as well as other institutions that attack its citizens in different ways. Like I said, I am Nigerian, and I see a lot of corruption in my home country, and the ways that the government tries to silence its citizens, especially when they exercise free speech and are protesting against injustices. We are also experiencing climate catastrophes and really the rise of authoritarianism. Sometimes, watching the news can be very depressing, and it can almost feel like despair because we really wonder, where are we going? What direction are we going, and where is this all going to lead us to? It just feels like our world feels overrun by destructive power. And so I love conversations like this because it gives us the opportunity to unpack these issues, to really think about how politicians are normalizing hate speech for some circles, or even silencing people who are wanting to speak up against injustices. Thinking about misinformation and the harm, who has the power, who is controlling dialogue with social media, for example, how is it siloing people? And, we are only seeing what we agree with and not really having enough opportunity to engage with different thoughts and ideas that can be problematic. Thinking about marginalized communities, Indigenous peoples in Canada, migrants in the US, protests in Nigeria. How do we demand accountability? So I'm very excited about this conversation, and I look forward to this dialogue. Oh, sorry, back. No.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Enyinnaya, and telling us about the cost of freedom of speech, and also how do we hold people, accountable for their actions. Now we'll turn the microphone to Dr. Keziah Wallis.
We did have 10 minutes, right? Everyone's been really short. Okay, I have a script because if you've been in my class, you know I never stick to time, and I've never gotten through half of a conference presentation in 15 minutes, so I apologize. So our provocation for today is usually interpreted as speaking to universal themes of good versus evil, order versus chaos. But an anthropological perspective asks, are these really universal categories? What do these categories say about the cultures that hold them to be true? What happens when people don't fit into these categories? So, if I was being a good anthropologist, I would be throwing a spanner in the works. So that's what I'm about to do. Sorry. Many anthropologists study how boundaries between us and them are drawn, maintained, and crossed. Today, I want to talk about two contexts that many of you are probably not very familiar with, but are near and dear to my heart. They are contexts that, while they may be new to you, actually help reveal something crucial about our global moment that goes beyond them. I'm going to begin with a bit of a personal frame and discuss some things that have happened in New Zealand politics this year. Growing up in New Zealand, I was actively entangled with politicians across the spectrum. Political difference was fierce and contested, but it never seemed to mean political hatred. Today, as I watch the news, all I see is us and them rhetoric from both sides. New Zealand has long been seen as progressive, the world's first country to give women the vote, the first trans MP in the 1990s, known for consensus politics and the treaty partnership between Māori and the Crown. It also fits into a pattern of being an early mover in relation to LGBTQ2+ rights. Not always the first, but consistently within the first wave globally. New Zealand was the 13th in line to legalise same-sex marriage, but it became world famous for the cross-party support and the spontaneous singing that united the political spectrum when the bill passed. Just a decade later, the same country that elected the world's first openly trans MP, a former sex worker no less, now sees its first non-binary MP driven out by a combination of external toxicity, death threats, and an internal failure to support them. Benjamin Doyle, in the valedictorian speech, cited death threats and abuse directed at them and their family, including their child, lack of party support in dealing with harassment and threats, which were also coming from other MPs, the cumulative toil of the abuse and lack of support on their well-being. Now, this is within 5 years of no politician when I lived in New Zealand had any kind of security detail, including the Prime Minister. And now a brand new backbencher has been driven out through the inability for security to provide support to them and their whānau. How do we make sense of this, given New Zealand had trans representation 30 years ago? And I'm not saying it was great, but it was a lot better than it is today. What's changed? Also this year, David Seymour, leader of ACT, New Zealand's Libertarian Party, made voting for the first reading of his Treaty Principles Bill a condition of ACT's support to National in forming the current coalition government. Basically, this bill was about removing any rights granted to Māori with the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the document that legitimates New Zealand as a country. The bill is supposed to remove what Seymour argues is a racialised system that privileges Māori. In the first reading of the bill, National MPs were not allowed to vote their conscience, but were mandated to vote in favour, even if they were fundamentally opposed to it. As a result, the first reading of the bill passed 68 votes to 54. And while it was rejected at its second reading with only ACT supporting it, Māori confidence in Parliament and the us and them between the Crown and Māori has become even more solidified. It's important to also recognise that Seymour himself is Māori. The complexity of this fact alone should give us pause about simple us and them narratives. But when we take into consideration the fact that even the so-called right-wing National Party was overwhelmingly opposed, it forces us to look a little deeper at what's going on. The fact that National MPs were forced by coalition agreement to vote for a bill their own Prime Minister called simplistic and divisive, and which they knew would cause deep pain to Māori communities, shows how power politics trumped principles. This wasn't about National MPs putting forward policies that they believed in. It was about choosing a side and sticking to it. This isn't just about parliamentary theatre. It's reshaping communities, families, everyday interactions. We're watching the real-time construction of new categories of belonging and exclusion in a place that defined itself against this kind of toxicity. My second case, Myanmar, pushes us to consider the stories we don't hear about and how these problematize simple narratives. For those of you who may not be aware, in February 2021, the Myanmar military seized power and arrested democratically elected leaders. Massive protests broke out across the nation, and the military responded with a brutal crackdown involving several massacres and ongoing violence against anyone suspected of being opposed to the military dictatorship. It made the news very briefly and then silence. In fact, many of you probably haven't realized the conflict continues. Is it really a coup when the military controls only 21% of the country? Insurgent groups and ethnic armies hold 42%, while the remaining is contested or unclear. In August last year, resistance forces captured 2 regional military command centers, the first time this has ever happened in the history of the country, within 5 months. And today, the majority of Rakhine State and almost all of northern Shan State is in the control of ethnic armies. Is that a coup? I would say no. I'll let the poli-sci people decide. Amidst all this chaos, the military has announced in January general elections will be held either this year or early in 2026. But who will get to vote? Will it only be those in the military-controlled areas or elsewhere? I want to problematize this, though, by talking to you about a specific figure. I want to challenge this idea of military bad, democracy good, and that idea that we can simply fit people into these categories by talking to you about a friend of mine, Henry Van Theo. Henry is an ethnic Chin Christian who served as a major in the Myanmar military and was elected as an NLD member, so the Democracy Party, member of parliament in 2015, and appointed the second vice president in 2016, making him Myanmar's first non-Buddhist vice president. The military arrested almost all other government leaders following the coup, with the exception of Henry and his fellow vice president, Min Shui, who was a member of the military party. So Henry was the only NLD member not to be arrested, supposedly. In fact, his family was unable to make contact with him, and they were not allowed to leave their house pretty much since the coup. But he remained in his position as vice president. In January 2023, Henry was hospitalized with a suspicious head injury on the eve of a key military council meeting. 6 months later, he appeared at the meeting, and only days later, the NLD expelled him for working with the military. He then retired in April last year, citing health reasons. How do we categorize him? Is he part of the military? Is he a democracy advocate? He worked with the NLD, but what compromises did he make in terms of ethnic Chin rights, in terms of non-Buddhist rights? How much power did he have to withstand the military? As an anthropologist, I recognize that when information is controlled, simplified narratives dominate. Military bad, democracy good feels right. But what about people like Henry? What about the millions living in these impossible in-between spaces? Our inability to deal with complex stories makes us want to rely on binaries, which is exactly what authoritarian regimes want. We also want to consider how global political ideologies and media narratives feed into these things. The military decision to take control didn't happen in a vacuum. Throughout Southeast Asia, armed forces have grown and continued to dominate politics again, despite the fact that only 10 years ago, this was not the case. It's not a coincidence that in the wake of the Myanmar coup, numerous coups happened throughout Africa. These things are all connected. What connects New Zealand and Myanmar, though, I would say, is the intensification of binary thinking and the demand for simplified categories in uncertain times. The violence, whether it is rhetorical or physical, directed at those who don't fit. And I want to be clear, I'm directing this at both sides here, right? If we want to talk a left and right, I see this happening on the left as much as it is on the right. In New Zealand, we can see new toxicity, imported frameworks, the reshaping of political culture, a reshaping not just of political rhetoric, which is to be expected, but the way in which politics is engaged in. In Myanmar, the lack of attention and understanding of the complex cultural, historical, and political context leads people to rely on media narratives, which again simplify complex situations into good guys versus bad guys. Both of these reveal how us and them thinking isn't natural, it's constructed, maintained, and increasingly globalized. This toxicity isn't a one-way street. In fact, we can trace connections where particular groups that might have opposing politics are actually learning from and supporting each other in ways in which they see themselves aligned. This shows us that nationalist movements globally are networked, learning from each other, validating each other. We can see this further in the intricate connections between Myanmar, Russia, and Israel, where the Myanmar military is being supported politically by Russia and technologically by Israel. The alliances forged between states and elsewhere against shared enemies again highlights this interconnectedness. These are all part of the same global system of othering. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. But anthropology reminds us that devils aren't born. They're made through the stories we tell and the boundaries we draw. The turmoil of our moment may come partly from the fact that reality keeps exceeding our categories. And rather than embracing that complexity, we're seeing a global doubling down on simplification. The question is, can we resist that? Can we hold on to complexity even when it's uncomfortable? What might the world look like if we move towards a pattern of embracing complexity and difference?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wallis. So from AI, the threat of AI, to the cost of free speech, now we've heard about how binary thinking can also create contentions about how we construct, identity. Thank you so much. Now we will turn the microphone to Dr. Zoe Francis.
So I'm not ready to deny that all the world is in turmoil, but my thesis is that it depends what you look at, and that the world has maybe never not been in turmoil. I think we all have a bias to think that our moment is the most important. And that makes a lot of sense. We can't affect the past. We can only affect the future through what we're doing in this moment in time. So it makes a lot of sense why we just pay attention to what's happening here and now. And I know that right now there are so many things happening in the world, and what is unprecedented right now is the amount of information that we have access to and our ability to see terrible things that are happening on the other side of the world, sometimes in instant time. And we're not always able to regulate our emotions around that. It can be overwhelming. Someone said it was depressing. So as the political psychologist here, I kind of want to focus on what you do with all of this information. Because yeah, our world's in turmoil. It's, I would say, not to minimize the current issues, but I would say it's always been in turmoil, and maybe pessimistically, I think it always will be. If you look closely enough, there will always be turmoil. Whether that turmoil is trying to make forward progress and a perceived inability to make forward progress, or what a lot of people are concerned about now, steps backwards that we're seeing in some places in the world, not everywhere and not in every domain, right? We're seeing continued progress in healthcare. Cancer treatments are improving. Ozempic might be the obesity solution that we're looking for, or it might be crazy and bad, we don't know yet. But big improvements are happening in our world, and also terrible tragedies are happening. So when you're consuming the media, what do you do with all of this information? And this does link, ironically / non-coincidentally, to what I was talking about in my political psychology class right before coming to this talk, which is that your emotions and how you see the turmoil in the world is useful if you can do something about it. And if you can funnel those emotions, that anger, the sadness, the feeling of injustice, if you can harness that into some sort of action, that is how you make forward progress. I like that this is, of course, a university forum here, because across time, at least for the last 100 or 200 years, universities full of people with youth and optimism are where a lot of social movements find their roots. And so I don't necessarily think I need to, give you a long list of all of the turmoils that are going on, although I appreciate some of them that are being highlighted today. But if you, I think that you need to determine for yourself whether you are already feeling so overwhelmed with the negativity that you're starting to feel like there's nothing to be done, and if that's the case, if you already feel like, I'm aware of all of the shit that's happening. Are we allowed to swear? It's like a classroom. Yeah. If you're already aware of everything terrible that's happening or enough, and you're already starting to feel despondent about it, then the answer is not to read more about terrible things that are going on, because you don't need any more information. What you actually need to do is to start improving, down-regulating your negative emotions. You need to start figuring out that there's good, that there's other people trying to improve things, and ideally trying to harness that to do something and to become more politically active, which I know many of you are. But on the other hand, if you do think that you have more capacity to learn about more issues, or if you have extra time on your hands, then I'm certainly, I think it's so valuable to be able to find specific things that are motivating for you. Do I have any other things? Yeah. So I guess overall, in summary, as my script suggests, it is about where you look. And I think that a lot of how the world is in turmoil or not depends on where your focus is. It depends on the issues that are salient to you. And as someone who's medium clued into politics, who is medium on social media, I agree that the world is in turmoil, but all I can do is my best. And I'm glad that there's a lot of other people who are doing the same. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. But this is great about how do you regulate your emotions, given all that is going on. So at this point, we are going to turn the microphone to Professor Michael Batu, who is setting up here. I think he's done. So Professor Batu.
Thank you, Edward. Good evening, everybody. My name is Batu. People just call me Batu. I'm an economist. So I'm happy to be here to talk briefly about what's going on in the world and how the economy might actually be playing a role into this turmoil. So I want to begin by looking at how the global economy has been growing since the pandemic. We can see here in 2022, here in the chart, that the global economy experienced a contraction, and then after that, it bounced back. Okay, because the economies have opened up, we relaxed our mobility restrictions, and we can see here that global GDP growth has increased, and now it has kind of flattened a bit. Now the question becomes okay, the world economy is growing. We see here that probably it hovers around 2.8 to 3%. The question becomes okay, the global economy is growing, but is everybody benefiting from that growth? Or is that growth only concentrated to the hands of a few, right? So that concept, my friends, is what we call inclusive growth. Because right now, in terms of global development, that's a major issue. What we're seeing really is that, I'm gonna show you some graphs later, where we can see that the economic outcomes, growth has not been really even. And it favors or tilts heavily towards the rich. Okay, we will see that later. In terms of inflation, in terms of inflation, we saw back in 2022, when the war with Russia and Ukraine started, there has been a spike in global inflation, primarily driven by food inflation. The thing is, my friends, when food inflation spikes up, it's actually the poor people that are affected the most. Because if you look at the expenditures of different income brackets, if you look at the poor, you will see that more than 60% of their expenditures go to food. So which means that if food prices go up, it's the poor that will be affected disproportionately. Now the rich, for the top 10% of the income distribution, food expenditures account to 15 to 20% of their expenditure. So if food prices go up, they won't be affected much. And if we look at the distribution of poor people in the world, many of them overwhelmingly are in developing countries, right? So if food prices go up, what we see here is that developing countries get affected. Now, we see here in the data that right now, global inflation is around 3.2%, but it doesn't mean that inflation has no lingering effects. What I'm telling you right now is that inflation is like compounding interest. Right? So when you start compounding, especially right here, when inflation, especially in many countries, have reached double digits, the long-term impact of that would be worse down the road. Okay, especially for developing countries and those at the bottom of the income distribution. So governments in the world would tell you that, oh, you know what, we've been successful in terms of taming down inflation. Yes, I agree 100%. But it doesn't mean that the value of their money is the same worth as it was, let's say, a year before. Pretty much the value of the money in our pockets has been wiped out in the last 20 years or so. Okay, so that's just the reality. Now, this chart, my friends, is about uncertainty. Now, I'm an economist, and us economists, we come up with various measures of stuff, right? And one of these is what we call uncertainty, like how uncertain things are. There are many measures here, the different colors in the chart. So there's one about overall uncertainty, which I believe this is the blue chart. There's the economic policy uncertainty. This is the one in, I believe this is in yellow. And the trade policy uncertainty, which is in red. And we can see here that trade policy uncertainty has spiked really high here. Well, we know what's driving this, right? It's this trade policy of the United States. The going back to the protectionist policy is the one that's driving this increase in uncertainty. Now, when things are uncertain, my friends, it becomes volatile, right? So when you're uncertain, it becomes volatile. And if it's volatile, it creates the turmoil, you know? It's one of those things that stir the pot, so to speak. It's this uncertainty. That's why it's worth to share this metric from the IMF, which the International Monetary Fund, which shows how uncertainty is in terms of comparing it with what's going on with the world for the last probably 7 years. Now, are we in a recession? The reason why I'm including this chart about recessions is that, you know, the fear of a recession is another one that stirs the pot, right, of uncertainty. Many people say that, you know, we are right now. I say that we're not yet there. Let me explain. This, my friends, is the 10-year Treasury constant maturity returns, popularly known as the yield curve. There's a saying, my friends, when the yield curve inverts, we're in a recession. These arrows in red, my friends, show the periods in time where this yield curve inverted. Okay? And usually, recessions happen 6 to 18 months after the inversion. So it's not like an instantaneous thing. Oh, when it inverted, tomorrow we're going to have a recession. No, no, no. So we can see here, for example, there was a long decline, there was a long inversion, and then boom, there was a recession in early 2000s. Okay? So here, we are supposed to be in a recession, but then the yield curve bounced back. So we're not there yet. Okay? We're not there yet. And again, the reason why I showed this is because the fear of recessions creates that uncertainty. One more thing, it's about inequality. I want to show you this interesting chart. So this is from 2023. It says here the richest 1.5% own almost 48% of the world's wealth. The richest 1.5%. And if you were to combine all the value of their wealth, they can literally buy countries. We can see here on this chart on the right, the wealth of just 26 billionaires, my friend, 26. If we were to combine all the wealth, it can buy the economy of Italy. The combined value of the wealth of 26 billionaires exceeds the economy of Italy. Okay? It exceeds the economy of Canada. These 26 people can just buy us. We're already bought. I'm telling you, we're already bought. Okay? But that requires a separate discussion. And we're being filmed, so I'm not going to say anything unpopular. Now, what drives this turmoil? So let me just wrap this up. What drives this turmoil? I have identified several interesting points here. First off, there's the cost of living pressures. Right? So we've been seeing this all over the world, protests here and there, that life has become hard for many. So now they're protesting, right? It's the cost of living. What drives this cost of living crisis? Wages or wage growth hasn't caught up with inflation. People are heavily taxed and people don't see the benefits of these taxes. They don't feel it. They don't feel the worth that they're giving away to the government. That's one. There's also economic inequality. So I've shown you the chart earlier, right? So people see that, the rich getting richer, the poor becoming poorer, the 1% rhetoric, like Occupy Wall Street. This has been happening for a long time already. Labor and working conditions, so again, related to cost of living. Number 4 is important, loss of trust in institutions. We've been seeing this in Canada since the pandemic. It's become worse since the pandemic because people are losing trust in terms of the government, whether or not they could really take care of us. Okay? Whether or not they really serve the people or they serve only the interests of a few. Okay? And also there's the youth discontent. So in Canada, for example, the youth discontent is driven by several things like lack of employment opportunities. So many of you probably are struggling to find work. If you're employed right now, whether that be part-time or full-time, God bless you, congratulations. Because youth unemployment rate in this country is 23%. Okay, so more than 1 out of 5 people aged, I believe, less than 18 to 22, I think, are unemployed. Okay, and not only that, if you're thinking of buying your home, good luck to you, right? So good luck, good luck. So discontent. And by the way, this is not only true in Canada, but more so in the West. So that's just Canada, the United States, in Europe, same thing happening. And then there's public service grievances. As I've said, loss of trust in institutions. People are becoming distrustful of their government, and they see the government as the enemy. Okay? And we've been seeing this discontent happening in different countries. So, okay, I'm just gonna show this one. So I don't know if you know this flag. I don't know if you know this flag. Like, this has been a common theme across protests in Asia. It's the straw, Keziah, do you know that flag? Yes, exactly. And they're using this as a rallying flag. This is in Asia on anti-government protests. Okay? We had one in the Philippines. I'm Filipino. We had one in the Philippines last September 21. I would have joined the protest if I was there, and I would have waved that flag as well, throw stones at the police. I would have done that. Oh, and face the water cannon as well. I've done that in the past, facing the water cannon. And the way they do the water cannon, my friends, is they put ink on the water, so that when you run away, the police can find you. Okay, so they use black ink on the water. They put ink on the water. But anyway, that's just my experience a long time ago. And in Nepal, they burned the parliament. See, in Nepal. And I think they also, they're very violent there. Okay? This is in Peru. So it's not only in Asia, but in Peru. When are we doing this in Canada? When? Okay, so anyway, I'm not inciting violence, but I'm just asking a question. When are we going to do this in Canada? And here towards the end, happening in the West too, but in the West it's a different flavor. Right? It's in the West, different flavor. It's like anti-immigration. And again, these kinds of sentiments, I identified the points earlier, right? So for example, about cost of living, people blaming immigration. These kinds of issues about immigrants, this is more of a symptom rather than the root cause. Because the root cause would be like the lack of economic opportunities for these people. Just imagine if these people are gainfully employed, they're happy with their life, they're not going to protest. The immigrants too, we welcome immigrants. Immigrants, give them opportunities. We're okay. But the thing is, they come to Canada, they come to the United States, there's no opportunities for them. Right? I mean, the economy is not growing enough to get these people in. So anyway, I don't want to spend like 20 minutes, although this is like a course for me, if you ask me. But I'm going to give back the microphone to Edward. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Batu. So I believe you agree with me that, from what we heard about AI and the fact that we have to be more fearful of individuals who are hiding in basements not the public, not the corporations like OpenAI and others, but individuals who have so much capability to cause, harm. What we heard about the cost of freedom of speech, that we have mouths, we have brains, we have conscience, but we are unable to say what is on our hearts, what is on our minds, simply because we are fearful of being attacked. What we heard about the growth of intolerance and how binary thinking continue to reinforce divisions in society. What we heard regarding how we can manage information, that sometimes we should have the courage just to stay away from information so you can maintain your sanity. In fact, personally, I'm not on social media. You wouldn't find me on Twitter. Never signed up before. Or what we also heard about the uncertainty in the world and how it creates volatility. If I'm thinking about all this process from Peru to the countries that were shown, it is clear that those who are actually absorbing global turmoil are not those who are creating it, but rather those who are out there in the developing world who have to deal with these things. Now, we have our own challenges, here in Canada, and thank you very much for talking about, the youth unemployment, and also, about the economy, that we are not in recession yet. Yesterday, if you listen to the news, it was reported that the Canadian economy might bounce back in 2026. I'm looking forward to that. Maybe that can affect my salary. So you can agree with me that given what we have heard here, these esteemed scholars have taken us behind the headlines. The headlines about what is going on down south, and which, of course, have occupied, our minds. And in fact, what they have revealed here is that the undercurrent is also the interconnected and complex way which issues are related in the world that we live in. That when we are thinking about these things, we should be thinking about complexity and how things are multifaceted. They are not single narratives. In fact, one thing that Dr. Keziah said, he said that controlled single narrative, when information is controlled, single narratives dominate. We don't want single narratives here in UAV. We want to engage in serious academic conversations where we are not, feeling, depressed or afraid or showing favor to anyone because we seek anything. Here at UAV, let us develop that culture of speaking, truth to power, whatever that truth, means for you, meaning that we do not reinforce division, but we rather encourage, inclusiveness. I think before you bring your questions and comments, they deserve a round of applause, please. So who takes the first question? Who has a question? Okay, right. Do we have only one microphone? I think we have one. Can you scream, or I should bring in the microphone? Okay, thank you.
So I guess my question is, should the university be helping us, teaching us how to use AI to navigate this new world of AI? Because if we don't use it, if we don't do this like tutors too, then we might get flagged and they won't hire us because they already have certain parameters using their AI and just like disqualifying people because there's these boards and things like that, right? So I guess my question is, should the university feel helping us navigate this AI board, teaching us how it works and what are the potential like words that we need to look out for, things like that, so that we can get hired?
Thank you very much. Very brilliant question. The AI has come and it has come to stay, whether we like it or not. And I've given you the powers that, I've spoken to the powers that it has. Anybody can use AI now. You don't need to go to school. You don't need PhD in computer science to use AI. And what you can do with AI, you see, from myself to my friend Michael, if you look into the spectrum of the conversation we've had, there is a point where AI can be a solution. Technology, most importantly. And when it comes to your question that should a university actually be teaching students how to use AI, this semester, I happen to be teaching COM 251, which is data structures and algorithms. And when I look at data structures and algorithms, majority of what we teach can actually be done by AI. So in my assignment, I have a section on academic integrity, and I said, you're allowed to use AI. And why am I saying you're allowed to use AI? But you need to demonstrate to me how AI has not deterred you from learning, because that's the most important thing. I told you I wasn't an economist. I wasn't a financial analyst. But last night, I just sat down, just did some analysis, being an active, investor in corporate America. So sometimes I just sit down and then, I just do that. And what I was able to get was stunning. The kind of analysis, the kind of application of statistics, the kind of application of financial models is very, very powerful. These are things that I don't have to spend so much time to learn. The interpretation is there. The interpretability is there. So going back to your question, the answer is yes. The university should actually teach students how to effectively use AI and use it ethically and responsibly. Because what we have at hand has the power to build and the power to destroy. If we use them right, we can solve a lot of problems in the world that we have today. And if we use them otherwise, I can tell you we can put a flame on a fire station first, and then put a flame on all the neighboring houses so that the fire station cannot even help the neighboring houses. That is the power that AI has at this time. AI can filter into your grid electricity. I was reviewing a paper recently, and it's all about how do we measure attacks on the grid. And I was looking at it that, yes, attacks can come, through simulated, scenarios generated by AI by somebody who doesn't even know what they are doing. That is how powerful it is. And they can destroy the world. So it is time for us to start looking at AI in a different manner, more especially if we are in educational, setting, just as we are at the University of the Fraser Valley. I've always said it. Don't deny students on the use of AI. Rather, teach them how to use them responsibly. Thank you.
You'd like to comment on it?
Sure.
Mine's not too long. I think it's really interesting how the technology is adapting and, of course, how companies are trying to harness it. I do want to point out, though, that in addition to companies using AI, I know that there's an increasing number of companies who are doing interviews where they're testing people's skills in person or having kind of paper-based tests, because the information coming to them in the form of a resume or a CV is less informative than it used to be. The cover letter is less informative than it used to be because it could have been, and probably should have been, if your time effective, should have been written by AI. And so that means that companies are still potentially using it, and I know companies are using AI as a screening tool, but they're not, depending on the role, they're not always able to rely on that alone. So in fact, being able to still speak demonstrate skills for the types of jobs that you're applying for might be increasingly relevant as that testing gets rolled out. Yeah, but otherwise I agree that that it's important for the university and any programs that are trying to target, like, resume developing, getting a job, like that's not in most departments, right? I don't have any course where I'm telling people how to get a job. That's not what I teach. That's not my role in the university. But I think it's important for any of those skill-based programs or courses for those to keep up with the times. And, and going back to my brief theme of like, this isn't the first time this has been a problem. Companies have been screening for keywords for years and years, right? So that kind of screening that's being done automatically, that's not very nuanced, is kind of a long-term problem. Even before that, you think there weren't people judging handwritten resumes based off of the quality of the printing? People would be like, well, that's messy, chuck it out. So I think that it's important to keep your thumb on what the screeners are and being able to adapt to that so that you can get to those in-person interviews or skill testing stages where you can actually demonstrate that you can go ideally above and beyond what the free AI can do.
Can I add to that real quick? So in June, I had the opportunity to attend with communication, so the International Communication Association conference, and I did attend a lot of panels. So your question is valid because within educators, the conversations that we're having around how do we empower students, how do we teach them how to use this software or this tool, but also how do we make sure that their identities are protected and they are able to prompt properly, they are able to critically evaluate the output, and they are able to talk about it, like you said, right? And something that was agreed upon, two things. First, embodied AI is the future. Like, we are getting there. It's something that we need to be aware of. And so this is just the beginning points of that. However, going back to theories, really understanding theories and conceptions and back to the basics is so important, because when AI produces content for you, that critical thinking piece would come from your awareness of theoretical frameworks. And that is what will set you apart. That is what will help you craft your resume and your application packet to properly articulate what the organization is looking for. So yes, UFV is on top of that. In fact, right now I'm attending a course for faculty on how to use AI in the classroom so that we can, be more engaging and teach our students new tools and skill sets. We are on top of it, but we do have to do that with caution, recognizing that there are ethical concerns about, particularly around stereotypes and just harmful ideologies that are spread using AI, because if you think about it, really, it can be biased, right, in different kinds of ways. But how do we make sure that we're not perpetuating harm using this tool as well?
I'll be real quick.
Yes.
I just want to add to the ethical consideration, because I agree with a lot of this, but one thing that is not brought up in relation to ethical use of AI is the environmental cost. Okay, so as we move forward and think about these things, we also have to be aware of the infrastructure that is required in order to run the back engine of AI, but also the electricity consumption costs and the ways in which that gets disproportionately affected, right? So in BC with hydro, that has a massive impact on Indigenous communities because that's where the dams are located. And so the kind of proliferation of these things is not limited to the ethics of appropriate usage in that sense, but it's also like when we think about the climate crisis, how is this also impacting that?
I don't want to be left behind. No, but just briefly, there are still things that AI cannot do. So, for example, voting. Can AI vote? Can AI vote for you? The thing is, your vote might be informed by AI, but it is you, the person, will be the one to vote. So the thing is, AI is there, can make decisions for us, but not all decisions. Political decisions still are done by people, okay, not by AI. But of course, a lot of things now are done with AI. I use AI on a daily basis. I use AI to craft my email. So if you students, if you email me and I don't, and I'm in the, yeah, I admit that. Like I don't deny, I don't hide, you know, like I don't use AI. I use AI. And I've been so, as a frequent user, I can already tell if somebody is using AI from the phrasing. I could tell already. There are red flags for me, you know, and that's why when I compose emails or when I you know do creative things with the assistance of AI, I still do my own edits. Okay, and I don't let AI to write the stuff for me. I still write it, and I just let AI, you know, make it better for me. But it's still me. And you know, a trick, my friends. Let me just tell you this as a trick, especially those of you who have written output that's out there that predated AI. I ask AI to read all of my scientific works, okay? Because a lot of my scientific publications have been published, many of them predated ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, read all of my published works and analyze my writing style. And next time when we write papers, it's going to sound like you. Okay, so that's what I did. Anyway, thank you. That's all.
Okay, right. Any other questions? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Back to the quote, hell is empty, and all the devils are here. And I just want to repeat some of the quotes that I heard here from Dr. Wallis and Dr. Francis. We have a bias where we tend to focus on things around us. The world will always be in turmoil. And the devils aren't born, they are made. And I just want to think of a different quote that I just want to compare it to from Dr. Joanna Burke. She speaks about the deep violence and saying that we as people, we are warring people. We are also peaceful people. So meaning that it's quite inherited and it's been normalized that we kind of submit to war and violence or just being basically in turmoil from time immemorial. Because even if we go back to indigenous heritages, there was definitely turmoil. I didn't agree with some of the practices that happened in the past, but that's what happened. That's history. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Dr. Joanna Burke's quote? We are warring people, we are peaceful people.
Yeah, that's a great point. I, as an anthropologist, I'm very hesitant about any kind of universals, right? We do not like universal statements about people. But in terms of this particular one, it's a great one because it highlights the complexity. And I think it's fair to talk about it as long as we don't think about those as absolutes. I'm always reminded of Komatua Moana Jackson before he died. He said, we were not once were warriors, right? So a statement that was often talked about in terms of Māori is their warrior culture, once were warriors. He says, we were poets, we were gardeners, we were tailors, right? That warlike part is interpreted in one particular way. But actually, for those of you who've seen the haka, right? So the haka that's performed by Māori is often interpreted as a war thing. It's not, guys. I hate to break it to you, it's really not. When I crossed the stage with my PhD, a haka was performed, right? When someone joins parliament, a haka is performed. When someone leaves parliament, a haka is performed. There is nothing warlike about that. But it is a different cultural practice and a protocol that is interpreted in that way. And I think this idea that we have to fit things into turmoil versus peace, or warlike versus not, is part of the problem, right? That these are about engaging in living alongside other people, and that always involves tensions, and whether those tensions become absolutes or not is again a cultural practice, right? So in my classes, we talk a lot about this idea of othering. In particular was last week's topic in one of my classes, and we were talking about what would happen if we took away the notion of, the other or political boundaries, or one of them was around individual property. And students really struggled with that notion. They were like, and they were like, this could never happen because people are inherently greedy. And I'm like, Okay, well, I know from conversations with Edward that in Ghana, that notion of individual property is not there, right? And yet there's still like, and students don't realize that, they don't understand that. And I talk about how like, you know, power and politics, the idea that, you know, you must desire power in order to be a political leader. Nah, man, that's not how it worked. Like if my tribe said to me, get up on the stage and do it, it doesn't matter whether I want to or not, I got to do it. I've been told, I've been chosen. And these are very complex, different interpretations. So I like that idea. I think that's really important, but I also think it's important not to hold those as opposing things, to think about those as things that define us as people, and instead to look for those gray areas in between.
Yeah, I also really like the quote. And as a psychologist, I'm happy to take the aggregate, like just a mean of like all people and be like, yep, it's in the middle. As you were saying, like, let's not clump it together. I'm like, I'll clump it. I'll clump it. No, but yeah, I totally agree that it's a really complex and that people are inherently have lots of different competing motives and that they don't fall into opposition. And sometimes war and peace are coming together, right? People engage in sometimes violent political action to try to stop a war, right? Well, that's sometimes inciting violence in order to stop violence. Wars are fought to stop wars, and sometimes, you know, the motives are a lot more complicated. So yeah, I just think that that's spot on, and I have very little to add. I'm happy with it being kind of part of, oh no, I had one other thought actually, with it being kind of part of human nature or something like that. There's a theory that's the homeostatic theory of well-being, which is that if everyone is more or less is like, if people are too happy and unstressed and everything is going too well, you kind of start creating problems for yourself. And likewise, if things are so miserable, you can't sustain absolute personal misery for an extended period of time, perhaps accepting some pathologies. But most people have a kind of homeostatic middle set point where you kind of want to be medium stressed, or, you know, medium low stressed. And you have these opposing forces kind of within yourself that are making you seek out challenging things, whether that's seeking power, seeking collaboration, seeking relationships, seeking complications, you know, seeking forward progress, going out and doing things that are challenging and pushing yourself, and then also not being able to do that all the time and not wanting to do that too far and needing to have relaxation, needing to have happiness, needing to have calmness, and needing to have kind of personal peace. So I think that even within individual person, there's these kind of opposing complexities, and you can't have too much of anything, including maybe too much peace.
You know, when I listened to that quote, what it reminded me is the motivation for technology development. And when you look at most technologies being developed, the motives are really good. Maybe a significant, you know, or percentage of technologies being developed, and I mean significant, has good intention. In fact, many a times when they are being developed, you know, the extra edge cases were not considered. And those edge cases are the cases that, you know, the bad actors will trade. But when technologies get into the hand of bad actors, they think differently. They think illogically. And by the time they twist the motive to suit their own, you know, interest, that is when we have turmoil. When you look at this room, you can imagine that this room, I believe, we are all good people. That's the reason why we can all be here. You can imagine if just one person has a bad intention of throwing a bomb here. We won't be having this conversation at this time. And that tells you that, you know, oftentimes, you know, when these technologies are being developed, they are developed with good intentions. Getting into the hand of bad actors is what, you know, negates those good intentions. Thank you. Hey.
So technology doesn't have emotions. It's human beings who have emotions. Okay. Yes, please.
That I sort of I conclude these past questions together with also thank you all five for being enthusiastically willing to have tough conversations. I especially appreciated some of the things that Dr. Francis and Dr. Wallis said about the polarization of information and how narratives in these times of uncertainty, narratives can be kind of pushed into those edges, oversimplified extremes. And Dr. Francis, you spoke a bit about how we're often not really emotionally prepared to hear new information and not just be kind of reacting to it. So my question is basically, as students in a university, an institution where we're supposed to be preparing to bring more order to the world, how can we engage in university life in a way that facilitates a culture of real dialogue rather than further stirring up these polarized, symbolistic narratives?
Polarization is one of these things that is not as extreme as people think it is on an individual level. If you actually ask people what you think, if you ask Democrats in the United States, what do you think Republicans think, they will give you an extreme Republican characterization that is a lot more extreme on a lot more issues than even the average Republican response. So what and the same vice versa. There's actually not as big of a gap. There is a difference, there is polarization, but it's not as significant as people think it is. And the reason, or the way to overcome that is to have the actual in-person dialogues, to get to know each other, to have informal conversations, to have like cross-party talk, to have conversations with actual people. And on a university level, like what to do, it is about interacting with people, like in person, having conversations, having social events. I think UFV has a debate club right now. Is this true? Someone, yeah. Okay, I was super involved in university debate for like all through my undergrad and throughout grad school, and it's so great. So everyone joined debate club. But even other conversations that happen informally in other clubs, like, you know, if you're on some swim team or sports team and you like talk to people, it's just forming more connections. And that is how you get to know people who have maybe different views, and not just interacting with people, but don't be afraid to talk about politics, or don't be afraid to talk about religion, or don't be afraid to talk about the other, what are the other banned things? Politics and religion, those are whatever the other things are that you aren't supposed to talk about, you know, don't be afraid to talk about it. And I know that requires getting to know people, but it really is like getting beyond the computer screens and getting beyond social media and interacting with people. Or like if you play the online video games, whatever those, that works too. Yeah.
So, you know, free speech really is, well, it's speech that you don't like, right? So if you don't like what people has to say, you know, you go against the person. It's hard to speak freely these days. It's hard. There's fear of people losing employment. Okay, like I, for one, I want to say many things right now in this. I want to say many things, but I couldn't say it. I couldn't say it. As a brown person, as an immigrant, I have many things to say, but I couldn't, because there's real fear of losing my job. Let me give you some context. I appear in news media in the Philippines, and you know, I criticize the government every 7 a.m. Philippine time. You know, I'm there like a talking head, saying things about, oh, you know what, the president should resign, these people should be in jail. Somebody wrote a letter to this institution, wanted me fired, and this is from the Philippines. So cancel culture is real, my friends. And I, for one, although I mean, I don't want to say that UFV is one of the lowest paying universities in this country, but the thing is, I still value the money I get from UFV. So I don't want to be fired. Okay, so there's this real fear. Imagine myself, a tenured faculty. What more a student What more an 18, 19-year-old person? What kind of future employment prospects you would have if you have recordings of you saying these things that are unpopular? So there's this real fear of speaking out. Now, of course, there are really terrible views out there that should be condemned, and I agree. There are really horrible, horrible things that people believe in. That in my value system, that's really, really terrible. But it's hard, especially when institutions have become hijacked by a certain ideology or certain group of people, to the point that the other groups, other marginalized peoples cannot speak out freely anymore. So until such time that institutions, I'm not just referring to UFV, I'm not referring to it, in general, as long as these institutions are hijacked by certain ideas, we won't be able to achieve this kind of free speech thinking that libertarians would think exists. No, we won't be able to have that. So we need to, if you ask me, there has to be some protections on speech. Okay, like you, for example, if you say some things, you cannot be fired from your job. We should have these kinds of protections. If you want people to speak freely, create the right incentives, create the right conditions. Currently, unfortunately, we're not there.
I want to really highlight how important that question was around how do you engage with difference? Because to me, that is at the heart of this, is the fact that we only are willing to engage with difference to the extent where we can make sense of it as sameness. And I always say to my students in anthropology is actually about becoming comfortable with difference that is scary and challenging and things that actually make you like uncomfortable to the extent that you're like, whoa, hang on a sec. And that's not easy to do. But the way in which I think is so important is to engage in at least listening and trying to understand those perspectives, even where they are really challenging, even where they are really problematic. Some of the anthropologists I have the most respect for have done work with groups like the KKK, with ISIS, with a group of Maoist. The longest running guerrilla warfare group is actually in India. And they have worked with these groups not to support them, not to say, yeah, they're good, but to understand where they're coming from. And if you can get to that point to understand where someone is coming from on a position that is radically opposed to yours, and sometimes that is something that is actually opposed to my very identity. But in coming to understand that, I come to understand the complexity of the discussion in a much more nuanced way that allows me to draw the lines as to where I stand a lot more clearer than just jumping on the bandwagon. Okay, so what I see happening again and again is people being like, oh, we're on this side, down with this group. And it's like, okay, but do you really understand why you're on that side? And is that really a side that connects to the things that you think about? My colleague just talked about this idea of keeping your job. When the coup in Myanmar happened, I pulled journal articles. I refused to publish. And that actually meant that my job was not that secure. Because as part of my tenure, I needed to publish. And I was like, one of my participants was massacred by the military in the Bago massacre, right? He was shot. And I was like, if I publish this, how safe are participants when I am actively involved in protesting the military dictatorship? How much risk is that? And there is that point. But that decision about where you are going to draw your line needs to be come out really carefully and really thoughtfully so that you fully understand the complexity of that. And the more you don't talk to the people who are on the opposite political spectrum, the more you don't engage with the people who think about LGBTQ rights as different to you, the less you're actually going to understand and the more you're actually engaged in dehumanizing them. And the first step towards genocide, the first step towards any kind of violence is when you dehumanize people. I don't care how bad one side is, we should never, ever get to that point of dehumanizing them. because it's a slippery slope from there to removing personhood, to removing rights, and to engaging in those same acts that we're condemning. So I want to throw a provocation to all of you to try and spend time, not just with people who are on different political spectrums, but with people from different cultural backgrounds. This binary thinking that we've all been talking about historically is not the norm. It's become the norm through processes of colonialism. But this idea of these kinds of binaries of good and bad, left and right, up and down, all of these things trace their history through Greek philosophy, into Christian doctrine, into particular patterns of European philosophy. But when we start to look at many, many cultures, we start to look at Africa, we look at Asia, around the world, indigenous cultures, we don't see binary thinking. We don't see us and them. We still have ideas about who is part of our community and who isn't, but this rigid boundary around it is less there. Now, the fact that this has become a global norm is a product of the dominance of European ideas through colonialism. So the more that we start to engage with those things and challenge ourselves, I'm not saying you're going to get rid of that binary thinking. If you have grown up in that culture, that is so deeply rooted that it is almost impossible to get rid of. But you need to push yourself to recognize that and push yourself to try and understand. Trying to understand a different perspective is not the same as agreeing with it, right? It is not the same thing. But you can't disagree unless you understand where that thought is coming from, and unless you can see that person as a person, right? That person who holds that view and acknowledge their personhood.
Can I just add like a very short addition? I agree and echo everything that they've said. And something I would like to add to that from an intercultural lens, I really loved Keziah talking about engaging with other cultures. I feel like we also need to reflect on our own identity. How do you know what you know? How were you exposed to that? How does that shape who you are and your interactions? When we start from that point, then we engage. Catherine Sorrells talks about praxis. So really looking at organizations or groups that advocate for issues that highlight marginalized voices. When we engage with those groups, it moves that awareness from theory to praxis, because ultimately you want a hands-on, active engagement with a lot of these ideas. And we really can't until we are working with people who are doing the work.
Right. Thank you. There are more questions. Okay. There's one there. Okay. I think I saw a hand up here. Okay, we see 3 hands here. So let's start from you. Yes.
So this Politalk, particularly through Batu's slides, we see young people, a lot of them in this room, right, getting their voices heard, trying to do stuff in the world, right? But it's always through protest, or it's always through fighting the government. It's never within the government working outside, right? So do you guys think that the youth are gaining more opportunities and more open dialogue and influence in politics? And if so, is there a cap to that?
Very important question. Thank you. If we look at the nature of protests happening in Asia, they call it like a Gen Z-led protest. So it's young people who are actually going out there protesting. Okay. And that is something that we've seen something like this in the past, especially in the 70s and in the 80s. But now it took a different form. Okay. Because there's technology, there is phone apps. From what I read in the case of Nepal, they even, the government turned off the internet. They switched off the internet. So what people used is, there's an app called a Bit, like a Bit chat app. Okay, so if you're gonna do protest without government, when government shuts off the internet, there's still a way to talk to people. Okay, I've downloaded it myself because I thought of going to the Philippines to join the protest there in September 21, but I didn't. I wasn't able to. But I downloaded the app anyhow in preparation for future protests. So yes, it's good the youth is leading this, but in Canada right now, and also in the West, the young people are depressed. This is my general feel of the young people. They're depressed. It's like economic opportunities are gone for them. And what I notice is many of the young people, they actually leave. They leave Canada, they leave the United States for better pastures elsewhere. I've had former students who left Canada and made their way to Florida or Texas, like states where they thought that they could prosper economically, or some of them moved to Asia. There's actually now a phenomenon in the Philippines where young people, mostly white people, they move there and with $20 a month, they live on subsistence living. And they vlog their experiences. They're popular vloggers. They're in the beach. I'm here learning how to surf. So they're okay. However, that cannot be sustainable because at the end of the day, in this country, we need the skills of young people. And it's sad to think that the last 10 years, I would have to say, and I would say really 10 years, was a wasted 10 years, a wasted decade, especially for young people. And with unemployment rates of 23%, and people actually leaving the country, cannot afford to enter the housing market, kids living paycheck to paycheck, that's not the kind of country that we want. Okay, so but I'm not losing hope, my friends, because I see that young people are starting to wake up. I'm longing for the day that you young people start to take your country back, because right now we don't own this place. We've been talking about polarization, left versus right, extreme left. No, it's not that. I mean, politics is a spectrum, right? So you have this distribution of political beliefs, but my take on this, my friends, is it's not left versus right, it's up versus down. It's up versus down. And populism, actually, that is the essence of populism, us versus the elites. I'm telling you, whether that be left-wing populism a la Bernie Sanders, or right-wing populism like Steve Bannon, like in the United States, there's more things that unite that extreme than divides them. And that's us versus the elites. And the elites have been dividing us for a long time. And what's going on with the young people right now, it's a manifestation of that division. So, but I see people waking up, and start to realize that, we should be doing something. That's why I asked earlier, when are we going to start, protesting? When are we going to start going out and, and expressing our disgust with these kinds of policies? But anyway, I don't want to incite violence because we're being filmed. I'm not a fan of violence, okay? But the thing is, we need to respond. We need to act. Sorry.
No, I'm not really inciting violence. I have two things that I want to say on two sides of this. The first is, I'm always reminded of Tamaiti, who's a very famous Māori activist and politician who was arrested on charges of terrorism that were later dropped in New Zealand. And he says, the mana of the government can never outweigh the mana of the people. So mana is a Māori word for power or sovereignty or authority. And what he was getting at is the fact that the government only has power or authority because we give it to them. And when the government is making decisions that the majority of the people do not agree with, they don't have that right. And that's protest. And he was instrumental in a number of very famous New Zealand protests that led to massive legislative change. So I want to encourage you guys to think about that. And part of that is knowing your rights as students. I'm going to say this. Oh no, he's left now. I was going to say this if he was here anyway. Is don't be afraid to protest, guys. When I was a student, we went on strike. We refused to sit our exams. And the university had to pass us. I'm not saying UFE would do the same thing. But We were very aware of what our rights were as students and part of our union, and we took a stand where it mattered. Not constantly, but where things were really important. So I want you guys to think about that in terms of when and where your lines are and putting your heart and soul into it. On the flip side, though, I want to say protest is the easy part, right? How many of you are actually, you said the point about young people in politics. Why not? Why don't we have young people standing for government? New Zealand elected a 23-year-old woman, right, as an MP, right? Do I agree with all of her policies? Not really. Do I agree with most of them? Yes. Do I know her? She's a friend of mine. Yes. But you know, but she is there representing the youth voice, and she has made some big changes because you do need to have a seat at the table. You are the people who are going to change the future. You are the inheritors of what we've done. We've done our best. You get to pick up the banner and keep going. But why? How many of you are actually actively involved in SAS or other forms of politics? And if you're not, why not? Yeah, it's easy to say we're out protesting. Okay, yes. But the hard work is actually done in the day-to-day grind, right? The boring stuff that nobody wants to put that effort into. I'm that person. I don't want to be that person either. But you have to ask yourself, am I actually being part of that? And is that part of the problem? Do we not have people involved in those things? And that's not just being like a youth member of a political party, right? That's pushing to be an actual, what do you call it, MLA, MP. I don't get to vote here, so I don't pay a lot of attention, right? But being those things, why not? What's wrong with that? Why can't you? You can vote, you can be that.
All right. I'm going to start with a quote that's from Abraham Lincoln, which says the best way to predict your future is to create it. Think about Elon Musk, who once Republican in presidency, and then acquired Twitter for $44 billion. There is a cost, there is a price. And the price doesn't have to be $44 billion, because if we're looking at $44 billion, I'm not sure there is anybody in this room that can afford that. But okay, so now where am I going? If you look at White House events, launches, dinners, or whatever it is, you see the tech guys on the table. So saying Sam Altman, you'll be saying Tim Cook, you'll be saying, Microsoft, you see Google, you see all of them on the table. Recently, I know the King Charles held an event in the UK, with Trump in there. And, I saw the big guys there as well. And the question is this: how do they get a seat on the table? You have to create the future. And as I said earlier, the technologies we have at hand today, I'm not joking. We use them every day. I know how powerful they are. I appreciate, the advancements that we've seen, in recent times. They can change the world. Think about the social media. And the world is now a small village. We think about talking about protest. You just all you need to do is just maybe create WhatsApp group and then start sharing the link. And as you continue sharing the link, definitely, it will explode, just like a rumor, the way rumor spreads. So what are we doing? What are you doing with what you have at your hand right now? It might just be a phone. And I mean a smartphone. Those smartphones, when you look at the chip on them, they are incredibly great. You look at the kind of information they can process within a short period of time. They are incredible, unbelievable. We never believe we can achieve this in this short period of time. And what is that telling us? When you look at AI today, you think about all these, illnesses, cancer, all those kind of things. Now we can be thinking of nearing a situation whereby we have precision healthcare, in a sense that you can develop a drug for individual. Those are dreams, many years ago. So again, you can create the future. And I challenge you today to start. Yes.
And to add to all of that, because I like to add to everything, there is power when we come together. There is so much power because we've talked about that top down. That is what the top is genuinely afraid of, is that power in unity. Recently, Jimmy Kimmel was fired because of his, speech. And I think he was making jokes about the president of the United States, and he was fired. And this was on, what's the name of the show? The Jimmy Kimmel Show on ABC. And people, and this was on Disney, right? People stopped their subscription to the point that Disney crashed. And they lost $4.something billion. And guess what happened? He came back. So there is power, and sometimes when we think about social identity theory, why there is that us versus them is to cause that divide, that polarization, because they benefit from that. But when we are able to have dialogue and come together and recognize who the true enemy is, then there is more hope.
Can I just add quickly?
Yeah.
Talk forever.
So, I summoned the Batu protest profile, I protest. One of the things we say during protest is the people united cannot be defeated. That's one of our chants, the people united cannot be defeated. And as I said earlier, it's polarization. You're right. It benefits the people on the top. Let's do a virtual tour right now to a hospital. Okay, let's imagine ourselves, we are in the lobby of the hospital. I was there like a few weeks ago. You will see a lot of people in the lobby. These are usually our seniors, our loved ones. They're suffering, they're in pain. They are in the hospital lobby. There's no rooms for them. These people paid taxes all their lives. Do you want the same fate to happen to you? It's our government failing us. It's our leaders that are failing us because they're not serving us. They're serving a select group of people. So what I'm saying is, you need, for you to be enlightened and to be awake, is that you need to experience these things. You need to see it for yourself. You need to see poverty in the face. See the indigenous people suffering. You need to see our seniors who are languishing in hospital hallways. You see homeless people. People who are suffering from drug addiction. Because clearly these things that we see, other people, these are human beings, my friends. They are they are a manifestation of the failure of us as a society. And we need to take our country back. It cannot be like this. It cannot be like this forever, believe me. Because who knows, some of you, once you reach that age, you will be like them. Do you want that kind of life? Well, right now you're young. It's not too late to do something.
Wow. Hey, so looks like you are getting some good advice here. Your future is on the chopping board. And you have some big powers sitting out there who are chopping it. And you need to ask yourself this question: are you going to be an architect participating in your own future demise? You need to act. And that action starts with, thinking beyond, binary lines, and perhaps, breaking down the boundaries of individualism and beginning to think as a people, as a community. And in this case, maybe to preface my closing remarks, you need to begin to look at how we can learn from other societies, because there are some good lessons that we can learn from other places. So perhaps we should begin to think about politics, differently, and begin to act, differently. I think there are two, folks, here. Oh, actually 3. And we have 15 minutes. We have, 17 minutes, to round up. So I will take the 3 questions together. So we will ask our panelists, to respond to that. So please, yes, let's start us off. Yeah.
Religious element to it. And I was wondering, what do you think the role of religion is in this discussion of a world in turmoil and a religious world?
Hey, thank you. Yes. Can we get a question from you too?
Dr. Batu talked about the steps going from fear to uncertainty to volatile to turmoil. And so
Is that a phone question? Is it your question or somebody from? I heard YouTube. Is I really live stream here? No? Sorry, my I won't.
Yeah, it's layered, so feel free to answer part. So it's is the volatility simply a measurable fluctuation in the economics, or is it a social construct? And then what is the responsibility of leaders to manage the societal collective confidence or the economic fundamentals that you were talking about? And then where's the ethical line between fostering this kind of resilience or optimism or manufacturing or manipulating it?
Hey, great. So yeah, the third question. There's the third question. There's a third question. Yes, please.
The us and them thinking was talked about a little bit. I think Dr. Wallis talked mostly about it. And I totally appreciate the danger behind that. And I think you said the us and them binary is what authoritarian regimes want. As we're seeing, even in democratic systems, it's still kind of what we get. And you see the incentive, all it says, just take an issue and make it a wedge, create an us and a them. Right, say for gun policy would be, if the us is those who want public safety, so no guns, and the them is those who don't care and want guns. So with that, coupled with the fact that people are some combination of busy with their own lives and oftentimes kind of intellectually lazy, they don't really want to deal in complexity. It is the most effective way to try to get to a point that we can deal in complexity at the higher level to combat the us and them thinking per se to begin with, or could it be used as a stepping stone? For example, to say the us is those who are willing to deal in complexity, even if it's not us, but our elected officials, and then them is those who give the one answer. Simple.
Okay. So I think these are very broad questions, and I believe all of you will have something to say, but there was one that was directed specifically at you, so you might want us.
I apologize because I thought you were reading a question off from YouTube comments. That's what I thought. I thought we were being live streamed. That's what I thought. So anyhow, okay. So let's unpack the question. So the uncertainty measure is a deviation from the norm. So when we have a norm, for example, like we know that the US has been putting in place like a certain level of tariffs, and then suddenly the announcement was like, oh, really? We're gonna have 100% tariffs on products that would spike uncertainty by a lot. So that's the core of our metric for example, like trade policy uncertainty. Okay, so that's an example. Now to your other question about our government, like whether or not they're really serving us, I would like to give you an example about the bread price fixing scandal. I don't know if you've heard about the bread price fixing scandal. So what happened there was that the grocery chains, they have been in collusion with the bread producers to jack up the price of bread. An example of bread that they jacked up the price was the Wonder Bread. This is the bread that kids eat. So the Canadian Competition Bureau found that these grocers were actually manipulating prices. And there was a settlement that happened. And if you signed up on the settlement, I think you're gonna get $5. So just imagine they've been doing this price fixing on a basic food item like bread. And guess who are the grocers in there? The Weston family. Okay, so these are the rich, the elites. They're the ones that are effing us for a long time. And you know what the government did? What the government did? They just allowed it. They allowed it. And they just slapped them with a fine, settlement, then we're done. These people should be in jail. And yet our government is enabling them. So you see, this is an example of the government not serving our interests. So our interest is to have cheap food, nutritious food for all of us, especially for children. And yet these companies, these corporations have the audacity to manipulate the price of bread. Can you imagine? This is the kind of country that we live in. When the price of, and by the way, this is also true for developing countries. In developing countries, they manipulate the price of rice, corn, for poor people. In this country, it's bread. You see how cheap these corporations are? They're gonna try to squeeze the last dollar even from the poor families, and yet our governments enable it. That's why I'm saying we need to do something. We need to act. We need to go out in the street and protest. This is not supposed to happen. Why? Because the fact that we sit here and do nothing, we also enable them.
Okay, I'll try and keep this quick. I'm going to try and answer the two about the us and them and the religion together. And I want to start with the religion because I feel like that's a fairly simple one for me to answer. It's too easy for us to blame religion. And we ignore the fact that religion can be a powerful source for many things. It's not religion itself. That's a really easy thing for us to blame. It's the way in which people use religion and interpret religion and weaponize, right? And so I always say to my students when I teach religion is not a thing. It's not neutral. It's not independent of people. It is people who do this. And when you look at, for example, peace building versus colonialism, the same discourses in Christianity have been used in both, right? Exactly the same passages, exactly the same interpretations. We look at this in terms of climate rhetoric as well. It's not religion, it's people, right? It's people who are doing that. So I would just flip that and say culture and that us and them rhetoric. And I think you're right about this idea of where do we go with that step? Because it's very hard to get away from that us and them rhetoric. And it is definitely part of democratic governments, right? That's why we see the shift towards authoritarianism. Part of what I was trying to say is this has become the norm in New Zealand when it was never the norm before, right? There was always New Zealanders, I like to joke, used to operate with the idea of Parliament was like a toy. Labor has had it for 5 years now. It's National's turn to play with the government. And I kid you not, that was how our elections worked for my whole childhood. There were various points of time where National was in power, usually when we were in economic crisis, because National is good with money. Labor's really good about rights. Now, it is no way like that. There is the left and there is the right, and you choose a side and you stick to that side and you hate the other side. I'm a Māori Party supporter, but I don't like their immigration policies. I'm a Green Party supporter, but I don't like that they're letting go of the environmental issue in favor of social. It's not that I don't care about the social. It's that there's kind of these shifts that are happening, which are about aligning to political spectrums. I don't think the answer is necessarily to say us is those who are prepared to deal with complexity, because that's another reinforcement of us and them. I think the challenge is to resist simplified narratives. The challenge is to not always look for the easy answer, but to be okay, right? This is also not always looking for the easy answer. To be okay with being like, you know what, I don't have time. I'm too tired. I'm going to recognize that this isn't necessarily the right answer, but it's okay for me just to do this one. I don't have to hold every single banner for every single battle and understand every single thing, right? That's not the way to win a war. Wow, I just went into militarized really fast. Oh my God, sorry guys. But it's not to recognize those things and to think about that. I think that's the danger that I see happening around the globe. And I know, Edward, you and I have had this conversation around this sort of partisan politics spreading into places that never had that. It's a reinforcement of this us and them othering system. And it prevents us from recognizing that actually, you know what? Labor is really bad with money. But right now, national, there's this great meme of like the minister for finance, like driving a car and every economist is going like, go this way. And she crashes the car in a parking lot with nothing in it. That's literally what's happening. All the economists are like, this is not going to be good for you. And it's like, okay, national has lost their thing that they're good at, right? So, but where do we look at that and recognize strengths? Like, yes, I'm sorry, social things do come at the cost of the economy. Like social improvements and social welfare type things cost money, they cost taxes. And when we don't accept that and acknowledge that, then we kind of fall into this binary. Anyway, sorry, I'm gonna stop there. Yes.
The nature of my question was a bit confusing, but I was referring to it as a tool for hope building. Because I'm a bit biased, but in my experience with religion, I found it as more of an anchor, and that I find that I'm often more hopeful than my peers who don't have faith.
Okay, so I would say whether you're religious or not, draw upon your philosophy. So I'm part of a big project where I'm working with economists and economic geographers. And we're looking at the ways in which it's called transitioning to wellbeing economies, and it's imagining a different way of measuring the economy in New Zealand. And my work is actually on what's called spiritual ontologies, and it's how religious ideas about the world, religious worldviews are shaping the way in which people are engaging in social good. And so we're looking at a nominally Christian, it's a Wesleyan organization that is working in a very poor Māori and Pacifica community with debt relief, and how like Christian ideas are actually shaping the way in which they're engaging in reconciliation work and engaging in trying to build a better community. So I would say whether you're religious or not, like whatever it is that is your kind of spirituality, your foundation, yes, draw upon that, think about that. That is the power of it. But recognize that it's okay if others don't share that. And it's okay if their visions are different, that you want to try and compromise together something. Yeah. No, I did 2 and 1.
Three questions.
Yeah, you did 1 and I did 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Go.
I like the ending on hope, and that even if you aren't religious, that finding a source of hope and knowing that you can make a change. And it doesn't have to be protests. We've heard lots of great advocation if you want to be out there with posters and like apps that I haven't heard of. But if you want to be involved in governments, if you want to be involved in like boring stuff, I mean, for some of us, that sounds a lot more appealing. Some of us want to do the paperwork. It might be slower, but you don't have to, everyone doesn't have to do the same thing to be active. You also don't always have to make a change by being involved in government or by politics. People also do improve the world in their communities through non-government organizations and through not-for-profit charities, through healthcare work, through all sorts of different things. People donate money once you have it, if you have it. You donate time, you post things to social media that are well thought out and informative if you can figure out how to balance that. You talk to people who have opposing views. And lastly, you listen. And I think it's so hard to listen. That has been discussed a little bit already today. But I think it's really hard, especially when you have passion and you have things you want to say. It's so hard to listen. And sometimes you miss the question. Sometimes you miss the point that you're trying to hear, that you're trying to respond to. And so I think practicing listening, like Keziah mentioned earlier, is just so important.
So we are just 3 minutes to 6 o'clock. And let me offer these quick remarks and these formal in a point, form. In fact, you are looking at the very first panel of Politalk Roundtable without a political scientist. And what they have done, today clearly reinforces the fact that politics is so embedded and so inherent in all of us that politics is just too serious a matter to be left in the hands of politicians alone. So we are all, number one, in politics together. 2, What we have also learned today relate to, free speech and questions relating to identity. Now, it looks like from all the conversations or the what we have heard our panelists, say, the problem really is not free speech, and the problem really is not about identity, but it is about those who monitor and those who use it as instruments of power to dominate, others. And that we have a responsibility to think about how we confront those challenges. But we need to think that these are not just simple issues. They are highly, complex and intertwined. In that regard, we must think about living with difference. We will never be the same with everyone else around us. But one way, or perhaps the ultimate way to do this, is to recognize our common humanity. That regardless of one's identity, regardless of what one believes in, their culture, their race, their ethnicity, we are all human beings. We all bleed blood. None of us, bleed gas. So it is very, very important that we see that. And that we also think about issues that affect, others. You cannot stand idly by. And we should also stop pointing fingers at others. Because, in the country where I was born, Ghana, there's a saying that all the time when the moment you try to point fingers at others, just try this. I just want you to try it. Try it. Just try it. Just try it. Okay. Now, when you're pointing fingers at others, this finger, how many are pointing at me? Right. Good. How many of those fingers are pointing at you? How many? 4 of them. So it calls for self-reflection before you begin to, to accuse, others and begin to, categorize them and create all these things. Nobody points at people like this. You always go like that. Now someone is trying to change. Now you're like this. It should be that way. So all the 10 fingers are pointing at the prayer. Yeah, so you that's awesome. So what does that mean? What it means here is that what these panelists, have taught us, today is to learn to live with difference and confronting our challenges, head on. We need to wrestle the bull down, holding the horns and breaking it down and making sure that we overpower it. But in doing this, we can learn from other societies as well. Because we need to break down the boundaries of individualism, because it can actually reinforce binary and all these divisive, politics that we see about we versus them. In fact, last Friday, the political science department had a retreat, and we're having a conversation at lunch. And in fact, one of the questions, I asked a question, I said, how come, democracies seem to be on decline in Western societies? They're supposed to be, Western societies are supposed to be the torchbearers of democracy, advocates, leaders of, promoting human rights. And our colleague, our senior colleague who is not here, Professor Hamish Telford, said something that was quite instructive. He said that, with the end of the Cold War, we have turned against each other and trying to tear each other apart. When I was thinking about that, it wasn't only the Cold War, but it was also 9/11. With 9/11, when you look at the First World War, Second World War, the Cold War, 9/11, the enemy was always out there. But what have we done? In the past 10 years, at least, the wasted decade, and I agree with you, we have weaponized identity. And that has become the source of internal destruction. And that is what we see, around us. But you see, some of us have lived on this planet at least for 5 decades. So if we go today, it's fine. But you are here, even you are not in your 3rd decade, and your future is on the chopping board. It is being chopped by powers that you see, yet because of your fear, you cannot say anything about it. My encouragement to you is what the panelists have said. If you need to disengage emotionally, do that. It's good for your health. If you want to engage, do that because you have the power to engage and in a meaningful and respectful way to cause the change that will make your life better in the future. Thank you all for coming, and let's give again a round of applause to our and in fact, I will end on this note that, as I said, that we should all speak without fear or favor. And clearly, we have done that. And we have engaged in these conversations in true spirit of academic, discourse. And that, let us maintain that so we can deal with, the challenges of our time. People should be able to own up to who they are. And that when they do that, let us encourage them that we are not like you, but I appreciate you. That is very important for our lives. Thank you very much. And PSSA, Brown House, go and continue with the conversation. Don't keep yourself out, okay? We'll see you again at next Politalk, which is going to be a book launch coming up in a month's time. And you are going to see the poster all over the place. Our own Professor Noah Swartz has written a book, targeted dealing with gun violence, gun politics and policy, and he will tell us more about that when we do that. So thank you very much and have a good evening. Yeah, thank you. That was awesome.
Not enough people are speaking.
That was awesome.
Thank you. Thanks
That
for
was
having
awesome.
me.
You know,
It was great.
If I were to be in Ghana, I would be whacked on the head. You know why? Because I